Welcome to the module on trade and FDI linkages. This brings back to the backdrop of this study, which raises some issues related to these interlinkages. Most importantly, the interplay between trade and foreign direct investment, which is named as FDI, has been recognized as one of the most important issues in the global economy. Across the global economies, it has been realized that this interplay brings between lots of benefits for the nations which are engaged within the trade, and also they are get benefited from the foreign direct investment that flows across the nations. This actually conceptualizes on the basic concept of international trade, which refers to the exchange of goods and services among the different nations, and thereafter FDI, which is also interlinked in this particular context. So it says that this interplay has become increasingly significant with the advent of globalization. It is said predominantly that globalization has a lot of dimensions, starting from economic, cultural, financial, political, and socio-economic. And apart from this, it is very much linked with international trade and also the capital flows. And among the capital flows, one of the predominant flow had been the foreign direct investment, which is considered to be highly stable and as a result of that less volatile. So trade basically refers to exchange of goods and services, which is also involving FDI. And FDI is basically a stock of capital, which brings in capital expertise, managerial forum, and also some kind of skills which all the nations can acquire and develop their strategies. So over the years, it has been seen that the global economy has witnessed both upsurge in the trade and the FDI flows. Trade is basically measured by the sum total of export plus import divided by GDP, which is considered as the trade expressed as a percentage of GDP, which has increased over the years along with the inflows of foreign direct investment. So this actually brings us very important fundamental on the issues that how the theoretical foundations based with the empirical literature and also some of the basic policies that can be drawn from this interlinkage discussion between trade and FDI. Moreover, it has been seen that by the policymakers and the researchers, they have been actually investigating into this interlinkage to a greater extent so that they can contribute to the sustainable growth and development. This brings into the question on this particular regard that explain the orientation behind the issue. So the orientation behind the issue is absolutely deep-rooted within the policy of globalization and how the policy of globalization is also linked up with the trade mechanism. So trade on the one hand refers to exchange of goods and services, and globalization refers to the openness. So both of them are complementary to each other, which makes it very clear that with the policy of globalization, there has been more recognition of trade and FDI across the globe. This brings us to the introductory issues referring to this particular discussion. At the very introductory outlook, we can see that how trade and FDI are complementary to each other. First and foremost, with the policies which are taken up by the different economies across the globe from time to time. And these policies were centered around liberalization, privatization, and mainly globalization. So whenever the trade liberalization was adopted in any of the economies across the globe, the first entire target was on reduction of the trade barriers. Because the trade barriers refers to the import tax or tariff or the quota, that is the quantity restrictions, which have to be reduced or which have to be prohibited or removed so that free trade can pursue. This also makes us very clear that how an environment can be created for getting the business to be done more easily. FDI inflows can be actually being increased so that the investors are getting a hassle-free environment. Moreover, the foreign firms are given more and more access over the global markets, and as a result of that, investment climate becomes more conducive. Moreover, it has been seen that with the advent of globalization, most of the transnational corporations and the multinational corporations are setting up their companies or affiliates in different host countries. And as a matter of fact, they are also establishing them physical presence in the foreign markets, increasing the economies of scale, that is operating at a lower cost of production, and moreover they are catering to the dynamic demand that are created by the customers. Because with the advent of the globalization, the growing demand has been changing, and this change has been taken up by the foreign investors at one go. So it is actually promoting trade by enhancing the country's export competitiveness. Because whenever MNCs are coming in, they are basically catering to this growing demand not only within the country but also at abroad. So as a matter of fact, the export basket is expanding, and that is improving the export competitiveness. This brings into the notion the constitution of an affiliate, which is called multinational corporations or MNCs. So MNCs are operating so that they are engaging in FDI, so that they can operate abroad, and they can actually serve to the host market as well as to the other markets through exports. So when they are operating in a particular country, they are utilizing their country's resources, manpower, and even stimulating the growth of that country, and at the same time they are also participating in the export market. So as a result of this, these investments are very much crucial to contribute to the export-oriented regime and making the trade as a strong engine of growth. This brings in to the most important discussions on this interlinkage, which has very much important implications for the holistic economic development. And this economic development is actually for the host countries. So what does it mean? It brings in technology transfer. That means it results to the adoption of the cost reduction strategies due to more capital intensive mode of production. Job creation is also created by the acquisition of the skills. Moreover, we find out tax revenues are also increased because of more and more production, particularly in the indirect taxes. And the domestic industries which are backward or which are actually not done properly, they are also benefited directly and indirectly. Directly, they are participating in the trade, and that is called the forward linkage, and indirectly means the raw materials are demanded for setting up such industries. And more importantly, because of the supply chain management, the foreign suppliers are integrated with the domestic markets, and that was one of the most important objectives of economic globalization, so that the local distribution networks get more approved and also updated with the more and more technological savvies. So these linkages are very much crucial for the development of the supply chains so that they can upgrade the domestic industries and so that the competitiveness is improved. So conversely, trade can also influence the FDI patterns. So whenever we are talking about trade and FDI, the interlinkage, how the patterns are also affected. For example, when we go for a change in the trade policy, so initially the policy may be more inward oriented with imports, but there can be a transformation in the policy towards export promotion. So as a result of that, this will open up the market to the external or to the foreign affiliates, making FDI to be more convenient. Secondly, the preferential trade agreements can come up. This can also help in developing these issues. Multinational corporations' decisions are required to be shaped so that they can get access to the larger market, and moreover, the firms can be given more incentives to invest in the domestic country and at abroad. So as a result of this, with the trade restrictions which are coming in, they can make the firms to invest in the foreign markets, and the competitive advantage can be gained, because this competitive advantage will be actually making trade to be a strong factor to stimulate the growth. This brings in some more dynamics of the global economy, because within the domestic economy the developments are certain, and how the global economy can also get benefited if the trade and FDI linkages are strong. Moreover, we can see that the trade liberalization always facilitates FDI flows, and FDI comes in through export-oriented production. So there is a two-way relationship which exists between trade and FDI, not only in terms of domestic environment but also in upgrading the global competitiveness. So the relationship is very much important for job creation, technology transfer, and more importantly, development of the domestic industries so that they can compete with the foreign partners. So change in the trade policies also is a serious concern for the policymakers and the researchers to delve into it and to make some empirical findings, and based on the empirical findings they can also set up certain policies, certain strategies within this interconnected world. This brings into the discussion and a question regarding this issue. The question goes like this, that what is the introductory outlook of trade FDI linkages? So as far as the introductory outlook is concerned, very beginning the understanding of the interlinkage is vital because that is actually ruling the dynamics of the global economy. It is clear that with the policy adoption and the changes in the policy adoption from time to time, the relationship between FDI and trade will be more and more recognized because majority of the nations are in favor of reducing the trade barriers, opening the market to the foreign investors and making a two-way relationship between these two variables, that is trade and FDI. That means both ways they are complementary to each other so that they can support each other. At the other outset, another importance is how the growth and the development of the domestic country can be increased. And this can be done by job creation, by setting up the forward and the backward linkages and making the country to be more and more adjustable in this interconnected world. So as a result of that, the entire process will be more dynamic and making it convenient for the entire economies to stay in. This brings us to the discussions on the theoretical foundations of trade and FDI interlinkages. Because empirically this can be supported with the data, but however, every interlinkage has a theoretical base. So the theoretical underpinnings of this particular issue brings back to some of the theories which are discussed in the international trade economics. Firstly, the trade and foreign direct investment are the two significant drivers of the economic growth. So whenever we are referring to the significant drivers of economic growth, we basically refer to the previous singer, trade as an engine of growth. At the same time, we refer to some of the developmental theories which states how MNC can stimulate growth and how it can get all the benefits through trade. So interlinkage has considered attention not only from the economists but also from the policymakers, and this is a complex dynamics that needs to be taken up. The first theory that comes up is neoclassical trade theory. The neoclassical trade theory is basically in tune with the research contributions of David Ricardo and Hector Rollin, which says that the gains from international trade and the patterns of trade are very much linked up with the globalization. So countries will specialize in the production of the goods and services based on their comparative advantage. That means where there is a relative fall in the cost of production, driven by the differences in the factor endowments. It is seen that the two factors are labor and capital. So it can be seen that if a country has excessive of labor, they should specialize in the labor intensive good and thereby they should export that good with the country which is actually having larger endowment of capital. So as a result of that, the exchange will take place, and through this exchange, FDI will come in and the entire economy will get, or both the economies will get benefited out of it. Another important issue that comes up within the discussion of neoclassical trade theory is the mutual gains. Because this is how the trade becomes more and more widely recognized, where both the parties will gain in exchanging. So exchange actually means that it is basically covering of the deficits of the two nations, and this will end up in gains from trade, not only from production but also from consumption, and as a result of the gains from specialization. So it basically focuses on exchange of final goods but does not explicitly consider FDI. So this is one of the most important notion of this neoclassical theory, where FDI does not come directly, but obviously FDI is underlying the entire proposition. So it provides insights about the importance of trade, how it can act as a mechanism for reallocating resources and promoting efficiency. So whenever we are talking about the word efficiency, it means consumption gain and production gain must be realized, and there should be market forces which is operating, making a conducive investment climate. According to the international production theory, which is called the internalization theory, which basically is deep rooted in the neoclassical trade theory, but it makes an addition. This extension is by adding the concept of FDI, which was not directly mentioned by the neoclassical trade economist. But according to the internalization theory, this has come up in a bigger picture. It says that whenever the firms want to engage in FDI, basically to internalize their production stages, that means they want to take care of the cross-border advantages, they want to take care of the firm's specific issues, then the multinational corporations come in. So this is the entry of the MNCs, and by the entry of the MNCs, they want to seek profits by coordinating and integrating different stages of production. And as a result of this, FDI is creating a very strong role in making the foreign markets, particularly in getting an access to foreign markets, leveraging the technological capabilities, and at the same time, strategic assets are becoming more secured. Because everywhere there has been a competition to make the products to be internationally standardized. This brings us to some of the micro theories which are also very much related with FDI and trade linkages. The macro theories were neoclassical theory or internalization theory, but the micro theory refer to the firm level analysis. Because this is a question of market imperfections. So it is seen that information asymmetry is one of the basic features of a monopolistically competitive market, where one party will have more knowledge than the other when they want to engage in the transactions. And this will make up the shape, or this will build up the shape between trade and FDI more stronger. So what does this imperfection says? That if a firm wants to choose a technology or a brand, it has to invest in a foreign market so that it can take care of the intellectual property rights and maintain the control. So as a result of these firm level strategies, they will take care of the motivations, the strategies, and also they will engage in international trade and investment. And finally, the microeconomic foundations between the FDI and trade will be more robust. And most importantly, with the advent of globalization, there has been spread of global value chain. So whenever we talk about the GVC, or we talk about the understanding of the trade and FDI, the most important issue that comes in is how the productive activities can be more distributed. And not only that, multiple countries must engage in this particular process. So all the countries can be integrated if more and more countries come in and they join this global value chain so that each country specializes in a specific stage of the production process, so that each of the country can get the benefit from the specialization at every stage of the production process. And this has come up with a very new theory which has come up to address the interlinkage between the trade and FDI. Moreover, it has been seen that this interlinkage is highly facilitated by the technological advancements which are growing across the globe, particularly in the areas of business, communication, transportation cost, and as a result of that, the transportation cost and the liberalization policies have taken up a pivotal role. So the investment policies which are taken across this GVC is to optimize their operations, making the advantage of the cost differentials, and more importantly, the various countries are getting specialized from this kind of activities. So firms are engaging in both trade and FDI. They are participating in these gross value chains or the global value chains, and they are coordinating with the most importantly productive activities across the globe, and so that the competitive edge can also be developed in this regard. So when we are discussing the interlinkage between the trade and the FDI, and wherever the effective policies are needs to be formulated, it is very much important that the innovations, the economic growth, the inclusive development, all this comes up as the core issue. Because with this inclusiveness, we can say that how these developmental issues can be addressed in a more broader manner. This brings us to the questions on this regard, that what are the theoretical foundations? Most importantly, it is recognized that trade and FDI are significant drivers of economic growth. So they have actually taken up the major concentration across the policymakers and also with the researchers. But this interlinkage has been complex. But with the neoclassical trade theory as it has come up, either with the Hexter-Rollin or the David Ricardo, Trade has taken up a pivotal role to explain that how it can stimulate economic growth, but there has not been mentioned much on FDI. But later on, the theories which are referring to the internalization theory or the theory of the global value chains, which have recognized the importance of MNCs, the FDI flows, and how they can be interlinked with the trade. This brings us to the discussions on patterns of trade and FDI, and particularly in this interlinkage, what can we comment on them? First of all, it has been seen that with the emerging economies across the globe or the newly industrialized economies across the globe, these are closely interconnected factors. So the patterns are highly dynamic and they're evolving in this global economic integration. Most importantly, the interlinkages can be explained under various heads like vertical integration, horizontal integration, intermediate goods and services which trade comes in, and most importantly the automation, the outsourcing and the offshoring activities. So when we talk about vertical integration and horizontal integration, we are basically referring to the coordination at different stages of production. Vertical integration refers to the different stages of production of a single firm, how they are coordinated. For example, we take an automobile industry where we find out there is a division of manufacturing the engine parts, then the body parts, the total packaging, and also referring to the looks. So in an automobile industry, all these units are specialized in their own activities, and so this is an example of an acute division of labor and how they are integrated with each. So this integration can occur both domestically or it can also occur with the borders or across the borders. That comes in the theory of industrial restructuring. For example, India is taking up the proprietorship of the small car, but the K-series engines are developed in Japan and the body parts are taken up from the Tokyo. So as a result of that is an assembled product with different kind of locations, different kind of international partners which are engaged in this manufacturing process. So firms also involved in this vertical integration, not only for this assembling part, but also to gain more efficiency, to make it more quality conscious, reducing the transaction cost, and also secure a more concrete position in the supply chain. So when we talk about multinational corporations, it sets up subsidiaries in different countries so that each subsidiary specializes at every stage of the production process. This also brings into another dynamics of this pattern, which is called horizontal integration. Horizontal integration is expansion of firms' operations at the same stage of production. That means in the engine part only, it brings in more and more configuration, more advancements in the technological driven systems, AI models, or most importantly the analytics, which are expanding the same point but in the same stage of production. So this can be done when firms want to access larger markets, they want to exploit the other economies of scale, so that the entire economy can get benefited from this entire model. Most importantly, the customer base can be exploited, competitiveness can be enlarged. So as a matter of fact, the global value chains can be exploited more so that the countries can get benefit in specific stages of production. Next we come into the another important pattern, which is about the intermediate goods and services. Because in India particularly, which is an importing country, majority of the inputs are actually considered to be imported from the abroad. So as a result of that, with the emergence of the global value chains, that will have a significant effect in this regard. Because intermediate goods are those which are used as inputs in the production process, rather they are being consumed directly. So these goods can have multiple areas of transforming to the final output, but they can be traded multiple times across different countries before reaching the final consumer. For example, Sony Ericsson model, where the inputs or the computer bits, they can be imported across the globe and finally they can be converted into the final product. So as a result of that, the business processes, the logistics services, the outsourcing, these have gained importance over time because of the entry of the global value chains and more emphasis on these intermediate inputs. So trade in intermediate goods and services are growing, specialization is coming up, fragmentation is also coming up so that the entire firm can get the benefit from this efficiency so that the global production network can get enlarged. This also helps to discuss on intra-firm trade. This is basically taken up by different affiliates who can trade under the same multinational enterprise, because the multinational enterprise can set up affiliates across different countries of the globe where they can trade between each other. And this can be done in terms of components, in terms of semi-finished goods, and that is what is said assembled or processed. So these are several advantages for the MNCs, because MNCs can acquire knowledge, they can actually cross the different locations, they can also respond to the flexibility, and more importantly, they can take the care of the differentials in the countries. So this basically brings into the discussions of outsourcing and automation. So whenever we are talking about outsourcing and automation, it's basically how the activities are spread across the globe in different offshore activities, where outsourcing refers to contracting of certain activities, where offshoring is moving to a foreign location. So as a result of that, we can see that both the models, the country gets benefited for improving the export competitiveness. This also brings in some of the other issues, how the strategies can be developed to ensure competitiveness and efficiency. When we are talking about the non-core activities, for example, the other activities which are referring to the service sector, so there we can find out that these firms can relocate and they are in search of a lower cost of production. So as a result of that, they can manage the core activities efficiently. This also is very much linked with the global value chain. So the pattern of the trade and FDI is complex, it's evolving over time, and it is also taking up the opportunities of globalization so that the sustainable growth model can be developed. This brings us to the question in this regard that explain the pattern of trade and its linkages. So when we are looking about the pattern of trade, the dynamics of the trade is considered, and as a result of that, significant patterns of trade can be identified in terms of intra-trade, in terms of global value chains, and also in terms of the other activities like horizontal and vertical integration, and definitely with the advent of outsourcing. Now we move on to the effects of trade and FDI interlinkages. When we discuss about these effects, we are basically looking into the issue of growth and development, because that is how the effect can be actually measured. So when we look at the effect on growth and development, the first issue comes is the trade flows. And next we can talk about how these FDI flows can lead to the higher level of investment, how the job creation can be done, and how the technological advancements can be made. So FDI will definitely bring in managerial expertise, skills, so that the productive capacity of the industries can be developed, and as a result of that, the expansion can come up so that the domestic demand and the industrialization can take up the shape. This also brings in some of the advantages or the benefit that the trade allows. It basically facilitates the exchange of goods and services. Countries can have access to a greater market, and product diversification also can take place. So this is basically important, because when we talk about rise in the productivity or rise in the efficiency, and also talk about a knowledge-based economy, these are very much required. Another impact of this interlink is directly on the employment and the labor market, because it is the employment sector which has to become more dynamic, which will expand, and thereby it can engage different skills of workers. So that is how the trade liberalization has a linkage with the employment opportunities that will have an access to the domestic market and international markets. This will also create the boom for exports. Trade will also refer to the job displacement, and the impact will have a sectoral composition, because sector-wise we can explain the impact in terms of different categories of labor, so that the macroeconomic stability can be further restored. So FDI has the potential to generate employment, to create new business operations, more sophistication. It will also pave the way for ease for doing good business, and as a result of that, it will bring with it new capital, technological expertise, and it will stimulate the job creation. This also refers to some of the skills that needs to be developed so that the foreign affiliates and the domestic firms do not have any supply-demand gap. Another important impact is on the technological issues, because that is what we see, the technology spillover or the knowledge spillover. So when we talk about technology transfer, it is basically not the transfer of the physical capital, but also the transfer of the human capital. For example, the advanced technological skills, managerial operations and expertise, and the best practices. So when we talk about the MNCs, they are going to bring up with new production, new research, new development, so that it has a transformative impact on the domestic industries. So finally, through FDI, we can see that the local firms can benefit. This can enhance the productivity, the demand competitiveness can be improved, so that the domestic firms are more exposed to the foreign competition, but at the same time, they are not washed away by the foreign forces. They develop the capabilities and the resilience to combat the global forces. This also brings into the productivity and competitiveness. So when we talk about the productivity and competitiveness, we talk about the specialization. So by specialization, we mean different stages of production, how the range of inputs and intermediate inputs can be expanded, so that economies of scale can be taken up, and so that more competency can be developed between the models. So finally, the FDI will be contributing to economic growth, development, affiliates will come up, more and more efficient methods will be there, so that the global supply chain can be developed and this can be facilitated. This also brings in some of the discussions of regional integration and trade agreements, because these are very much important when we talk about more and more opening up or integrating with the world economy. First and foremost, with the custom unions, with the trade agreements, and harmonizing them together. So by the regional integration, we mean how the comparative advantage can be developed, how the value chains can emerge, economic integration can also come up, and more importantly, intellectual property rights, facilitation of technology transfer, all these are important. So this interlinkage has numerous benefits. Policymakers must address them, and there should not be any kind of job displacement. The potentials of the trade can be enhanced so that the countries can position themselves and they can reap the benefits of the globalized world. This brings us to the question of this particular issue, that what are the effects of trade FDI linkages? There are multiple effects, but in short, the most important effect can be figured out. That is the effect on stimulating the growth and development in terms of various positive externalities which are linked up with FDI and trade. This brings us to the concluding section on policy implications and challenges. So when we talk about the policy implication, the first issue comes in about the FDI promotion and investment policies, because these two are interlinked, which will bring a rise in productivity, more access to foreign markets. But whenever we look at the policy, the country should develop so that the markets can be taken up. That means we want to see that how the business environment can actually be created so that the foreign investors can be attracted. And this can be done not only by infrastructure development, but also by fiscal and the financial incentives that must be given, more and more hassle-free administrative procedures, and this will bring the policymakers to make a balance between foreign investors and how they can safeguard the national interest. Another important point is here, which comes in about the local development. That means the education, the health, these are the merit goods which the domestic economy must actually emphasize, so that the natural environmental issues also is taken up, so that they can contribute to this entire interlinkage. Another important policy that crops up is trade facilitation and infrastructure development. When we talk about the trade facilitation, we actually look after the connectivity factors. So this connectivity can be water transport, air transport, as well as surface transport. So when we look at the government's investments in the modern infrastructure like ports, railways, telecommunication network, that is the IT, all these are very much important in this regard. Improving the custom procedures, trade barriers to be reduced, these are also making the country to be more attractive in this trade regime. So as a result, we can see the developing countries are always facing these challenges at every point of time, and so that they can get the benefit from this interlinkage effect. This also brings in the question of security of rights, and that is what we say the intellectual property rights, or IPR. And this is very much important because in a digital world, there can be a kind of cybercrime or any kind of lack of these records. So as a result of that, efficient international property rights or systems must be there so that the foreign investors can safeguard their national policies, their assets, and also they can have the proper legal procedures mentioned in the guidelines. This also refers to institutional framework and the legal capacity. So moreover, we can see that the access to the patents, to medicines, all these are very much regarded or important for this IPR. Finally, the discussions on sustainable development and environmental considerations. So when we talk about sustainable development, it means that how the trade and FDI are interlinked with each other, how this environmental impact can be taken up, and how the policymakers can look for a better and a safe, sustainable future. And this will take care of the pollution, this will take care of the environmental hazards which are created, and so that the natural resources also can contribute to this trade and export mechanism. This also brings us to the discussions of a more inclusive global economy, whereby all the stakeholders of the global economy can be actually engaged. This also brings us to the discussions of the policymakers so that interlinkage can become more strong, sustainable developmental objectives can be addressed, making it a good place to live in. So this brings us to the question on this regard, that what are the policy implications that are arising from these interlinkage discussions. So this brings us to the issue of political economy, policy consideration, trade agreements, and more importantly, the essence of a good model to come up in this trade regime. So in conclusion, we can say that the interlinkage is one of the most predominant issue in a globalized world, where FDI will contribute to economic growth, trade will also contribute to economic growth, but there should be a kind of a synergy between these two macroeconomic variables. More importantly, the policymakers must adopt a more holistic approach so that the benefits of both can be actually taken up, so that the inequality, environmental concerns, political economic factors can be ruled out, and more research is required to investigate into this complex relationship between FDI and the trade mechanism. So this actually brings in to the discussions of how the trade and FDI linkage can be more robust so that developed and developing economies can grow in a symbiotic relation.